nitrogen, we in order to get into the nitrogen, I've got to talk a little bit about basically all the nutrients from a standpoint of requirements as far as crops are concerned. And so what I'm going to try to do is give you kind of some preliminary information about nutrients as a whole, and then we'll start with nitrogen. So the objectives that I've got today, first of all, to discuss the essential nutrients. Second, to talk about the nitrogen cycle, and then to discuss nitrogen from a management standpoint. So, third slide. And I know that there's a couple of you that are having some troubles with your connection, and so what I'll try to remember to do is to let you know that when I'm changing slides. So, essential nutrients. An essential nutrient is any elements that are required by plants or animals for normal growth and reproduction. We get a lot of questions now about genetically modified materials. Are they really what they're supposed to be? And I keep telling people that, you know, if a tomato looks like a tomato and it tastes like a tomato, then it really is a tomato, so don't worry about it. So as long as those essential nutrients are met in the plant, then I don't think we have any issues as far as nutrition is concerned or anything like that. Another thing that we've seen is that we get a lot of questions as far as organically grown versus, I guess for lack of a better term, conventionally grown vegetables and things like that. There was a survey done of all the literature that went back for about 50 years ago that was published in 2009 that looked at all the different nutrition, or looked at many different characteristics from a nutrition standpoint of fruits and vegetables and meats that were grown organically as compared to inorganically. And from a nutrition standpoint, they found absolutely no differences in that comparison between the organically and inorganically grown vegetables, meats, and fruits. So it's a choice. But from a standpoint of nutrition, there's not any differences as far as nutritions are concerned. Next slide. What we try to do through the soil testing laboratory is we try to get people to have their nutrients in what we call the sufficiency range. If you have one nutrient that is less than sufficient, then the plant's not going to perform as well as it can. So we want all the nutrients at the point where they are at the sufficiency range. Depending on the element, that sufficiency range may be very large, it may be very broad, or it may be very narrow. Most of the nutrients are pretty broad in that range, but there's a few of them that are very, very narrow in going from a deficiency to a toxicity. So the sufficiency range is very narrow. I'll give you an example of two of those. Excuse me. One of those is boron. If we look at the soil test boron, a 1/2 part per million soil test boron is going to be deficient for almost all plants. 1 part per million soil test boron is sufficient for most plants, and 2 parts per million soil test boron would be toxic for plants that are susceptible to boron toxicity. So we've got a range of about 1.5 parts per million from a soil test standpoint, where we go from deficiency to toxicity for boron. Well, copper's the other one that we have issues with. 0.16 parts per million copper is sufficient for most plants. If we go to 1 part per million, we see issues with plants that are susceptible to copper toxicity. So it's again less than a 1 part per million soil test as far as copper is concerned, where we can go from deficiency to toxicity. So with boron and with copper, be very, very careful if you get a recommendation for those. Our maximum recommendation that we recommend through the Texas A&M Soil Testing Laboratory is 3 pounds per acre of boron. With copper, we have yet to find a copper deficiency in the state of Texas that responds to copper. We've had a couple of places that indicated that we had copper deficiencies. We've done some tests on those, and we have yet to find a place that we actually get a response to copper. So be very, very careful if you ever get a recommendation for copper. because just a very small quantity of copper could take you from deficient to toxic if you actually get a response. So let us know if you get that particular area where you think you've got a copper deficiency. We would like to do some research on it to actually see if we get a response. Next slide. So we have primary macronutrients, and we have primary secondary nutrients, and we have our secondary macronutrients, excuse me, and then we have micronutrients. So let's talk about the primary macronutrients first. So we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These are our 6 primary macronutrients. The carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen come mainly from air and water. All of the other nutrients come from the soil. Now, many people will try to foliar feed different types of nutrients. We have found that nitrogen can be foliar fed, iron and zinc can be foliar fed, but most of the rest of them don't work very well. And if you are actually foliar feeding, it is more of a salvage of a crop to foliar feed with nitrogen, iron, and or zinc as compared to putting them in the soil. Now, we don't get much of a response to iron when it's foliar fed, whenever it's soil applied. We do see a response when it's foliar applied. But from an agriculture standpoint, most of the time it's too expensive for us to actually go out and do the foliar feeding, especially with zinc and iron, because you have to do it about every 7 to 14 days depending on what's going on. So it gets very expensive from the standpoint of the application. It also is very expensive from a nutrient standpoint. So most of the time we suggest more, especially from an iron standpoint and a zinc, that you rotate your crops, because many crops are much better at actually extracting those nutrients in certain situations. So back to the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You notice that I've written nitrogen one way, I've written phosphorus 2 ways, and potassium 2 ways. When you buy a bag of fertilizer, there's always going to be 3 numbers on that fertilizer, whether it be an organic source or an inorganic source of fertilizers. That first number is always the percent nitrogen, the second number is always the percent P2O5, and the third number is always the percent K2O. Now, that's not what's in the bag, but that's how it is represented. And as we go through nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, I'll give you some examples of what's actually in the bag to give us those different percentages of nitrogen, P2O5, and K2O. Next slide. The secondary macronutrients are calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Again, these are all derived from the soil. The plant root was designed to take up most of the nutrients, again with the exception of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, with the exception again of water. The water goes in through the roots much better than it does through the leaves. It goes out through the leaves more than it goes into the leaves. So why do we call these secondary macronutrients? Well, let's go back to the differences between macronutrients and micronutrients. When we talk about macronutrients and we actually get a tissue analysis, typically what we will see for the macronutrients is that they will be reported in percentages. The micronutrients, on the other hand, will be reported in either as parts per million or milligram per kilogram. So what's the difference between a percent and a part per million? Well, that difference is 10,000. So if we're looking at an element that is like nitrogen, that will be in the plant usually between 2 and 6%. That's the same as 20 to 60,000 parts per million. On the other end of that stick would be something, a micronutrient that would be very low, would be something like molybdenum. Molybdenum is found in the plant somewhere on the order of about 0.05 to 0.1 part per million. So extremely low, and so we're looking at somewhere on the order of about 10 to the 7th difference between a micronutrient like molybdenum, sufficient in the plant, but yet doesn't take very much to be sufficient in the plant as compared to nitrogen, which would be about 10 to the 7th times greater than that. So calcium, magnesium, and sulfur are going to be in the plant in very high concentrations. Calcium many times is in the plant somewhere on the order of anywhere from 2 to 4%. So it can actually be very high. And usually those types of plants are going to be the legumes, the plants that normally grow better in our neutral to calcareous soils or high pH soils. So these particular elements are going to usually be in the 0.1 to 0.5%, with calcium being sometimes as high as 2 to 4%. Next slide. The micronutrients are listed here. I'm not going to read them to you. But when I was in school, we had 16 essential nutrients. Now, depending on who you talk to, you may have 21, possibly even 22. But the other 5 or 6 that have been added, these are required by certain plants, but not by all. And so basically what they've done is they've changed their definition of essential elements to include elements that are required by some plants, whereas when I was in school, they were required by all plants. So what's the ones that have been added since the 60s and 70s? Those are cobalt, silica, sodium, vanadium, and nickel. Cobalt's required by plants that fix nitrogen. That would be our legumes. Silica is required by plants like sugarcane. Many of our small grains like wheat and rice will have quite a bit of silica in them. And then sodium is required by plants that thrive in areas like salt marshes or brackish marshes. Vanadium is required by blue-green algae, and then there's quite a few people that seem to think that nickel is required by a lot of plants in regard to some of the enzymatic type reactions, and serves as a catalyst. Plant physiologists there's still a camp that's on one side that says no, it's not required, and there's a camp on the other side that says yes, it is required. So we put it on the list, and some people agree, some people don't agree as far as nickel's concerned. Next slide. So if these things are actually essential, that means they have to serve a particular purpose in the plant, and nothing else can take its place. So if we take a look at especially nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, nitrogen, of course, is required in the proteins, which starts in the amino acids, and then it's part of the chlorophyll molecule. So a lot of times people refer to the green color in the plant that comes from nitrogen. Phosphorus a lot of times is discussed from a standpoint of blooming, but it's required in the membrane stability and energy transfer as far as what's in the plant. It's also very important in root elongation, especially in the beginning of the plant growth. Potassium, again, root elongation is one of the things that potassium plays a very important role in, and what we found is that phosphorus and potassium both contribute to winter hardiness. Now, I can't hear you, but I can feel many of you people laughing about winter hardiness in the state of Texas, especially in the southern part of the state. But every once in a while we get cold weather. Now we do get it up in the northern part of the state, and so phosphorus and potassium is very important in the root, the storage of starches and things like that in the root, so that when the next year comes around, that those plants will have the ability to green up faster and start growing much easier. So even in the southern part of the state, every once in a while we'll get some good hard freezes, and we could see pasture declines. We used to refer to that as potassium only, but we found that phosphorus plays a role in that as well. So make for sure that you watch out for the phosphorus and the potassium concentrations in your soils. So nutrient management is very important. Soil testing is very important to make for sure that you know what you got there. Next slide. Calcium, again, cell wall stabilization. Magnesium is also required in energy transfer and chlorophyll. So it kind of overlaps nitrogen and phosphorus. So again, one of the things that you really have trouble with is looking at a particular plant and saying, okay, this is a particular deficiency. Usually nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, we can do a pretty decent job of diagnosing deficiency symptoms for those. When we start getting beyond that, many times we start having some issues. So we're not going to make you a person that has the ability to do any kind of tissue diagnosis, but we suggest that if you've got think you've got some issues from a nutrient standpoint, that you take some leaves in the area where it's doing okay, and then some leaves in the area where it's not, and then do a tissue analysis in conjunction with a soil test to make a determination as to what element might be causing the issue. So sulfur, amino acids, iron, photosynthesis, boron, cell wall, and chloride, stomata. Now, chloride and potassium both play a role in the stomata regulation. So in the heat of the day, when the plant is actually looking pretty wilted, the stomates are closed, and that's what gives it that wilting effect. But if you look at your plant late in the afternoon, right before sundown, or early in the morning, if it's got good turgor pressure, the leaf is standing out very good, then you've got good moisture content. You don't need to water that night or anything, or that anytime during that day or anything like that. But if you're still don't have very good turgor pressure late in the evening or first thing in the morning, you need to water at night. What we try to get people to do is water infrequently and with depth. Whatever the evapotranspiration rate might be for that week, you want to try to replenish that evapotranspiration at one watering. So it means that you got to water several times, small amounts, to get that quantity of water into the soil. Otherwise, if you try to put it all at one time, what ends up happening is that most of it goes down the ditch or the drain. So it doesn't do us any good to water like that. We want you to water at night because that reduces the potential or the amount of water that you lose for evaporation. If you water infrequently, then you will not have the disease issues. But if you water every night, I guarantee you every disease that has ever been around will find your lawn and your flower beds. So make for sure that you do it infrequently and deep. Next slide. Well, we're trying. Let me try something else. Next slide. There we go. All right, now we're finally to the next slide. Okay, last elements, most of these are metals, and these are going to be incorporated into catalytic functions. They're parts of enzymes, and so they speed up the reaction but do not participate in that reaction. Next slide. Okay. Now, how do these particular elements move in a plant? To look at the deficiency symptoms, you really need to know how these elements move in a plant. If they're mobile, the deficiency symptoms are going to show up on the older leaves first, because what can happen is they can be translocated. And so I've listed the elements that are mobile. Now, if they're immobile, then wherever they go when they're first taken up, that's where they will stay. So what will happen is we will typically find these in the younger leaves first. So again, depending on whether it's a mobile or immobile element, then you can at least start making decisions as to which elements it might be, whether that deficiency symptom is showing up on the older or the younger leaves first. Next slide. All right, we've gone through all the preliminary stuff. Let's get started on nitrogen. Nitrogen looks pretty complicated. There's all kinds of routes and things like that that can occur with nitrogen. But we actually understand nitrogen pretty well, and so that may be why it looks complicated, because we've got so many things that we understand about nitrogen. But it is a very dynamic nutrient. It can do all kinds of things, and actually we lose it through leaching. We can lose it through volatilization. We can lose it through denitrification. All kinds of pathways that nitrogen that can happen to nitrogen. So let's start with the plant. What we would like to happen is that we would like all of the nitrogen to be taken up by the plant. I'm going to try moving the cursor here, and hopefully I won't lose it. So what we want to do is we want to try to do our best to get everything into the plant. There is a single source of nitrogen from a natural standpoint, and that is the organic matter. So if we don't have very much organic matter, we don't have the potential to recycle very much nitrogen. There are no minerals, there are no rocks that contribute nitrogen to plants or to the soil. So our only source of nitrogen is going to be dead and decaying plants and animals and the residues that come from those. Now, one thing that I want you to notice is that once we have it in the organic form, you notice that there's not an arrow going to the plant from the organic form. There is an arrow that goes around and to the plant. When we start this process going around, we do a process called mineralization. And that mineralization process basically takes the organic form of the nitrogen and puts it into an inorganic form that the plant can take up. The two inorganic forms that we want the plant to take up are going to be nitrate and or ammonium. So the ammonium has an arrow going to the plant and it can be taken up, and the nitrate has an arrow going to the plant and can be taken up. So these are the two forms of nitrogen that can be taken up by the plant. Now, there is another form of nitrogen that can be taken up by the plant, but there's not an arrow going to it because very seldom is it in the soil for a sufficient quantity of time to actually be taken up by the plant. If it is, then it is toxic to the plant, and it is toxic to any animal that actually eats the plant, and that is nitrite. And so we really don't want conditions sticking around to where we actually have nitrite building up in sufficient quantities in the soil to actually be able to be taken up by the plant. So what else can happen? So this is the process of recycling nitrogen from the organic matter back up into the plant, and that's called mineralization. And we'll go through the steps of mineralization through the process of this webinar. Now, we do have other sources of nitrogen, but they don't typically play a very important role because they are usually small. One of those is atmospheric nitrate, where every time we get an electrical discharge from a cloud, the nitrogen that's in the atmosphere that was in the way of that electrical discharge will be converted from nitrogen gas to nitrate. It oxidizes it, and so then that reacts with the water, and when we get precipitation, that comes down to us in the form of nitric acid, or whatever else was up in the cloud for that nitrate to adhere to. So we get somewhere on the order of about, depending on where you're located in the state of Texas, you'll probably get anywhere from about 5 pounds per acre to as much as maybe 15 pounds per acre across the state from electrical discharge. We get it from our vehicles. That little catalytic converter that we have puts out a lot of nitrous oxides, and those nitrous oxides go up into the atmosphere, and they can be again converted to nitrate, and we end up with that from a precipitation standpoint. We do take nitrogen out of the atmosphere, the nitrogen gas that we have in the atmosphere, which is approximately 78 to 79% of the atmosphere. That is converted by the Haber-Bosch reaction into anhydrous ammonia. The ammonia then is used to make all of the other nitrogen fertilizers. Well, we use anhydrous ammonia as a source of fertilizer as well, but you have to be very, very careful in how it's applied and when it's applied, because it actually gets injected into the soil as a gas, And so you have to make for sure that the soil covers that area where it's being injected, so that you don't get any escape of the anhydrous ammonia, because if you're downwind of that, you're not going to survive more than likely. So very dangerous, and so most people don't use it. We use it a lot in agriculture, but around our homes and things like that, we do not use it. We use the other forms that the anhydrous ammonia is used to make: ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate, urea, and those kinds of sources of fertilizers. So that's a very good source of nitrogen for us, and we apply that to the soil. It's an inorganic form, and it can be taken up by the plant. Now, there's several ways that we can lose nitrogen. One of those is with the nitrate. The nitrate, if you remember from chemistry, all nitrate nitrogens are water soluble. And so we can lose nitrate by runoff. It can be lost from an erosion standpoint just because it's associated with the water, and we can actually leach it. And if we leach it too much, we can actually leach it out of the rooting zone, and so it has the potential eventually to get into our groundwater. Most of the state of Texas, we don't have much of an issue with this, but there are a couple of places in Texas that we actually do. It's thought that the majority of that nitrate that is in the surface water, in the groundwaters that we have in the state of Texas, are from a natural standpoint and not from something that we as man have done. So most of the time that's going to be a natural situation, not something that we've actually allowed. We've added too much nitrogen to the soil and actually leached it out. Another way that we can lose nitrogen is from a runoff standpoint is with ammonia, because the ammonium ion has a plus charge on it. It adheres to the cation exchange capacity of the soil, and so it adheres to the soil particles. And so when we have a runoff, when we have an erosion event and we lose soil particles, or we move soil particles, then we can actually move the ammonium that we have attached to that. Now, in soils, we'll typically have somewhere on the order of about 10 pounds per acre of ammonium that is adhering to the soil surface. We account for that in soil testing, so that whenever we make our recommendations, we usually assume that there's about 10 pounds per acre of ammonium there that's available to the soil. So that kind of gives it in a nutshell what this graph shows. One other way that we can actually lose nitrogen is through denitrification, where we take the nitrate that's been in the soil, and then that nitrate, or that soil, becomes waterlogged, and the nitrogen changes to gaseous nitrogen, either as N2, N2O, or NO, and we lose it through denitrification. One of the other ways that we can actually gain nitrogen is through nitrogen, or symbiotic nitrogen fixation. We've got symbiotic nitrogen fixation and non-symbiotic nitrogen fixation, and we'll talk about those in just a little bit. So that's most of the nitrogen cycle. Let's take a look at each one of these from an individual basis. Let's change slides. Okay. There we go. Okay. So there's nitrogen sources. We got electrical discharge, we got commercial fertilizer, we've got symbiotic nitrogen fixation, and this occurs with rhizobium. We have plant and animal residues and manures. And then we've got non-symbiotic nitrogen fixation, and then acid rain. So let's change slides again. So the non-symbiotic nitrogen fixation, this comes from free-living organisms. This would be things like blue-green algae, and we get somewhere between 6 and 20 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year from that. And then we've got aerobic free-living bacteria called azotobacter that will fix somewhere between 13 and 83 pounds per acre per year, and then an anaerobic bacteria called Clostridium that will fix somewhere between 4 and 28 pounds per acre per year. So these give us, again, these are giving us certain amounts of nitrogen fixation. but not too high. Sometimes we can account for this and sometimes we don't. The acid precipitation will typically give us 4 to 8 pounds per acre per year, and like I said, in some parts of Texas you can actually get up to about 15 pounds per acre. Next slide. Conversion of nitrogen into plant available form. So we've got both the chemical and industrial nitrogen fixation. So from a synthetic standpoint, where we're manufacturing the nitrogen compounds, the ammonia is a basic building block of those that we make our commercial fertilizers with. So we take the nitrogen out of the atmosphere, we convert it, we combine that with natural gas, and we produce anhydrous ammonia. And then that anhydrous ammonia can be sold, or we can go to make different forms of our fertilizers, like ammonium nitrate or urea that you see here listed. Next slide. Forms of nitrogen in the soil, again, mainly is organic matter. We have organic forms of nitrogen, and about over 90% of that is going to be where most of our nitrogen is tied up in the soil. The inorganic forms, again, are going to be the ammonium. We do have nitrite, which I said we really don't want. We want to make for sure that we don't have conditions that accumulate that. And then we have nitrate. So the ammonium and the nitrate are the two dominant forms that we have in soils, and nitrate is actually the dominant form, inorganic form, that we have in soils. And it's going to make up somewhere between 1 to 2%, maybe up to 3% of the total nitrogen that we have in soils. Next slide. Mobility, again, the ammonium is attached to the soil cation exchange capacity, so it stays within the particle. The nitrate is a negative charge, which is exactly the same as the cation exchange capacity, and so it actually repels, and so it's actually very soluble, and so it's very, very mobile in soil. So wherever the water is going, that's where your nitrate is going. So we want to make for sure that we are irrigating properly, so that we don't actually leach the nitrate out of the rooting zone of our plants. Next slide. To continue on this. Mobility of the nitrogen in a plant, it's readily translocated, and so therefore the symptoms that we're going to see are going to be on the older parts of the plant first as compared to the younger parts of the plant. And then last, functions in the plant, again, amino acids, which go to form the proteins, and then it's a very important component of the chlorophyll molecule. Next slide. Well, here's an example of that acid rain. So we get from a nitrogen standpoint, it comes mainly from transportation, and the sulfur we'll talk about later comes mainly from industry. And once that gets up into the clouds, then it reacts with the water, or it can react with things like calcium. If you've got a dust particle up there that's got calcium or magnesium or sodium, potassium, aluminum, iron, all those different kinds of things that might be on a dust particle that would be in the atmosphere, would react with the nitrate, and then whenever it finally rains, it comes back down on us. One thing that next time it rains and we get a good thunderstorm, take a look at your grass before, and then take a look at your grass the next morning, and see if you see a difference as far as the color from a green standpoint of your lawn. I think you'll see a much different color. Next slide. So the biological nitrogen fixation, this is where we get a tremendous amount of nitrogen, and it can help us a whole lot from the standpoint of putting nitrogen back into our soils and us not having to apply a source of nitrogen either from an organic or an inorganic source. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. Hang on just a second. Okay, here we go again. So, symbiotic nitrogen fixation. The symbiotic nitrogen fixation is I scratch your back, you scratch my back, and so we have everybody gains something as compared to some people losing. And we've got this is going to come from the legume family. Each rhizobium Each legume has a particular rhizobium that will actually help it to fix that nitrogen much more efficiently. We've got a tremendous number of legumes across the world, something on the order of about 13,000, but about 200 of those are actually cultivated. So we add this rhizobium to the seed, and it helps that particular plant fix the nitrogen. So if you take a look at some of the fixation rates that I've got listed here, you've got alfalfa, which is one of our best ones. Fixes somewhere between 125 and 335 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Red clover up to about 85 to 190. Peas somewhere between 80 and 150. Soybeans 65 to 115. And then vetch somewhere between 90 and 155. So if you are working trying to reduce the amount of nitrogen that you're applying, whether it be from an organic source or an inorganic source, it doesn't make me any difference. What you want to make, if you want to try to reduce that amount that you're having to apply, legumes are a very good choice. And as to intercropping or between crops of what you're doing, or cover crops. So if you've got a sufficient quantity of water, then the cover crops can be very important to you. But you have to manage your soil water very carefully, especially in the drier parts of the state. Next slide. So our nitrogen losses, the one that we want is crop removal or plant uptake. If we could get all of the nitrogen to go that way, we would be in great shape. Unfortunately, not all of it does. The efficiency of nitrogen from a fertilizer standpoint would be approximately, can be as low as about 50% and as high as about 80%, depending on what's going on within the soil. Some things that can happen is denitrification. And again, that's where we have waterlogged situation, and that usually takes somewhere on the order of about 2 to 4 weeks to start occurring, and then we can lose great quantities of nitrogen if you had nitrate as the dominant form. Now, if it was ammonia, denitrification does not occur. So if we're raising something like rice, we want to put out, or any kind of aquatic plants, we want to make for sure that we're using an ammonia source of nitrogen as compared to a nitrate source, because that way we don't have denitrification. Immobilization, I didn't talk about that one a while ago, but immobilization is where we have something like a crop residue that has a very high carbon to nitrogen ratio, something over 30 to 1. We add that to the soil. What will happen is the microorganisms will start that breakdown of that organic material. And if that organic material does not have a sufficient quantity of nitrogen in it, then the microorganisms will start working on things like nitrate. And so they will use that nitrate that's in the soil to start the decomposition process of that plant material. And so what happens is the plant cannot compete with the microorganisms. So the microorganisms are taking the nitrate from the soil, using it in that decomposition process, and so for a period of time we have an immobilization of the nitrogen that was there, that would have been available to the plant. And we'll talk about some management practices that can be used to reduce this potential. We talked about leaching. That's only going to be the nitrate. The ammonia can actually be fixed by clays such as vermiculite, and that would render it unavailable. We get volatilization, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. It is different from denitrification, and so they're both gaseous losses of nitrogen, but they're very different in what is actually being lost. And then we have erosion, and this is going to be mainly from an ammonia standpoint. Next slide. We talked about these parts of the nitrogen cycle. We talked about mineralization, and again, mineralization goes from the organic nitrogen form to the inorganic nitrogen forms. Within mineralization, we have 3 parts. Those 3 parts are aminification, which takes the organic nitrogen and converts it to an amine. We have ammonification, which takes the amine and converts it to ammonium. And the last one that we have is nitrification. Next slide. So the nitrification takes the ammonium and converts it to nitrate via a route that has nitrite in between. Now, the good part about this one is that the microorganisms that do those conversions, the Nitrobacter is a very efficient microorganism. The Nitrosomonas is not so efficient. And so the Nitrobacter are waiting for each of the nitrites that are being formed, and then they quickly convert that to nitrate. So we usually do not have a buildup of nitrite in our soils or in our plants, which is a good thing. So this takes energy, and so each one of those conversions that we're going through actually take energy in order to make that happen. And it must be done under oxidizing conditions. You have to have an aerated soil. We will not have mineralization occurring if we have waterlogged soils. So if you want to reduce your potential, or if you're looking to have some mineralization of nitrogen in an aquatic situation, that doesn't happen. You're going to have to add some nitrogen there. It really does not occur under reducing conditions. Next slide. So this slide kind of demonstrates what goes on if you're actually waterlogging the soil. You see nitrification that occurs, and it'll continue to occur. It occurs under moist conditions up to a point where we've got about 60% of the pore space of the soil actually filled with water. Once we get to that point, then the nitrification and the ammonification start to decrease, and we start to see an increase in the denitrification. So again, once we get to about 80 or 90% of our pore space being full of water, then we start to see denitrification occurring, and we lose the nitrogen going off as a gas. Next slide. Whoops. There we go. Okay. Again, mineralization. We're taking the organic sources and going to inorganic forms. So we're going from an unavailable form to an available form in the inorganic nitrogen. Next slide. This occurs when we have carbon to nitrogen ratios that are less than 20 to 1. So you need to, if you're trying to increase mineralization, you want to choose sources of plant materials that have carbon to nitrogen ratios that are less than 20 to 1. And I'll give you some examples of that here in just a little bit. Next slide. The immobilization occurs when we have the plant that we've added some kind of residue that has a carbon to nitrogen ratio over 30 to 1, and so we end up with the microorganisms taking the nitrate out of the soil, using that nitrate to actually start the decomposition of that plant or animal residue, and we start to see that occurring whenever we have carbon to nitrogen ratios over 30 to 1. So if you want to choose something that's going to cause immobilization, almost any of the things like corn, small grain residues, trees, anything like that. So if you're putting out a mulch that's mainly a tree residue, you actually, and you're mixing it into the soil, you can actually cause this immobilization to occur. If you don't want it to occur, then you want to take the leguminous crops. Things like alfalfa, the vetches, things like that are going to have carbon to nitrogen ratios less than 20 to 1. So those kinds of residues will actually increase mineralization as compared to immobilization. Now, what we normally do if we have residues that we are applying, or we've got a crop that has a residue that's got a carbon to nitrogen ratio over 30 to 1, what we will do is we will actually add somewhere between 5 and 10 pounds of nitrogen per ton of residue. And there's an easy way to calculate how much residue you actually have. you can actually put out a square that's 4 foot by 8 inches and kind of rake out the residue of that material out of that square. Every pound that you have constitutes a ton of material on a per acre basis. So that kind of gives you an idea of what you can do to estimate the residue that you have. And again, almost any residue with the exception of the leguminous crops are going to have carbon to nitrogen ratios over that 30-to-1. So we would add that 5 to 10 pounds of extra nitrogen to decrease the potential for immobilization. Now, again, if you're using something like wood chips or sawdust, anything like that you're mixing into your soils, you probably want to use something like 20 pounds per acre of nitrogen per ton of residue, because you're going to have a much higher carbon to nitrogen ratio, usually on the order of somewhere between 150 and 250 to 1. So you would need to add about 20 pounds of nitrogen per ton of residue in that case. Next slide. So this gives you an indication where we have the net effect of the carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you're over 30-to-1, which is this particular line right here, if you're over 30-to-1, we have a net immobilization. If you're in between 20 and 30-to-1, then you have a break even, so you're not changing any nitrogen. And if you get less than 20-to-1, then you have a net mineralization, and that's what we would like to occur, is the mineralization. Next slide. So if we take a look at this, temperature plays a very important role in this nitrification. So if you start out, and as well time. So if we start out at 60 degrees, it takes about 30 days to get to about 65% of that mineralization rate. Whereas if we've got a temperature that's at 90, when we look at 30 days, then we're up about 90 to 95% of that material has been nitrified by that time. So temperature plays an important role as well as time. Next slide. Now, we have looked at these nitrification inhibitors, and what it basically is doing is it's cutting down the activity of the nitrous ammonium. That's the first one, going from ammonia to nitrite. And the reason they want to look at that one is because we don't want nitrite building up, so we don't want the nitrobacter diminished in any way. So it's the first part of that reaction, so the nitrous ammonium that they're trying to prevent activity. We found that in some places things like the nitropyrin works fairly well, or Inserve, but we've found more mixed results than anything else. So we typically do not recommend that you use these nitrification inhibitors, because they're much more expensive and they don't work for sufficient quantity of time in the state of Texas. The other thing that we found is with the sulfur-coated ureas, slow release nitrogen products that are often sold, or that you can purchase in a lot of places, we don't find but about maybe 2 to 3 weeks of extended time period that those actually work. So even though it says that it's supposed to work like 3 to 4 months, again, in the state of Texas, we found that they don't work but a couple of weeks. So again, we typically recommend that you don't use those products because they're much more expensive, and you don't get the results that they claim in Texas. They work in a lot of places, but Texas is an environment that they just don't work very well. Next slide. Leaching. Again, this is water transport. The nitrate is the one that we have issues with it leaching. And again, remember that not all nitrates are water soluble, so wherever your water is going, your nitrate is going. So be very careful in how you irrigate, and that if you're putting out your fertilizers, what we would typically like for you to do, if you think you're going to get a precipitation event, is go ahead and get that nitrogen on the ground, A little bit of water will get it into the soil very rapidly, and so as long as we don't have a real terrific leaching event, it should be tied up in around where the soil particle or where the roots are, as compared to leaching it out of the rooting profile of the plant. Now, where we have the dominant leaching of our nitrogen is in our sandy soils. So if you're in an area where you've got some very sandy soils, you're more prone to leaching than anything else for nitrogen. Next slide. Well, runoff. Runoff, the form of nitrogen that we're going to have the greatest potential for runoff is going to be ammonium. And because that is going to be adhering to the cation exchange capacity, which is on the particles. And so that's where you're going to get the highest potential to lose nitrogen, is from an ammonium standpoint. Next slide. This kind of gives you an idea that we do have quite a bit of carryover for some of our nitrogen. We have recommended, when people put out the recommended rate of nitrogen, and they don't get the yield goal that they were looking at, many times we get downward movement of that nitrate over a period of time. And so if you take a look at this particular side, we go down to 48 inches, with the exception of the side at Wharton. And if you add all that nitrogen up in pounds per acre down to 4 feet, and many of our crops will root that to that depth. Now, if you're growing radishes or a lot of our vegetables that are fairly shallow rooted, 6 to 12 inches is what you really want to be paying attention to. But again, you want to make for sure that we're applying the nitrogen in short bursts, and basically spoon feeding the nitrogen, as compared to putting it all on early, to where you have the potential to leach that nitrogen out of the soil profile. But if you're growing cotton, corn, tomatoes, some of the plants that have the ability to root to fairly deep depths, you may have a sufficient quantity of nitrogen down there that you probably don't want to be putting out, but just a little bit to get the plant started, and then leave it alone after that. So sometimes a deep testing, depending on what you're trying to grow, can be very beneficial, and actually save you a lot of money where you don't have to apply that nitrogen. Next slide. So conditions that affect the nitrogen cycle: aeration, very dominant. If we have reducing conditions, then we're going to be restricting the material, the things that can happen from a mineralization standpoint that give us the nitrogen from the organic matter. pH can play a very important role, and when we're adding organic sources or whether we're adding inorganic sources of nitrogen, they are all served to acidify the soil, especially if we're adding ammoniated types of nitrogens. So if you're urea, the organic forms of nitrogen are mainly from an amine standpoint, which has 2 hydrogens on it, and so all of the different sources of nitrogen that are amines or ammoniums are going to add to the acidity of the soil. It typically works best between a pH of 6.5 and 7.5, but it's pretty soluble all across there. But many times what we find is that the efficiency really starts to go down because of the plant that's growing. So if we can keep our pHs somewhere between 6.5 and 7.5, that usually gives us the most efficient uptake of nitrogen for their plants. Of course, we got to have a good moisture. If we don't have good moisture, we don't have plants growing anyway. So the moisture content plays a very important role. Temperature, we would like to have it, if it's less than 5 degrees centigrade, we're not going to have very much decomposition, because the microorganisms don't work very good when it's less than 5 and when it's greater than 45. The best temperature is somewhere between 20 and 30 degrees C, and that's when our microorganisms are working best also. And it doesn't really make a lot of difference what the source of nitrogen happens to be. They're all good and they all work if we put them out at the appropriate time and the appropriate amount. So if it's an inorganic source, we put it out today, you'll get a response tomorrow. If it's an organic source, because it's got to go through that mineralization process, then we've got to put that out ahead of time. And we typically recommend that you put your organic sources out about at least 4 weeks prior to when the plant needs the nitrogen. And I'll give you an example here in just a little bit as to when the plant really starts to respond to most of our nutrients. Next slide. Some more conditions that affect the nitrogen cycle. Anaerobic conditions are going to give us the denitrification, and so we're going to lose the nitrogen. If it starts out as nitrate, it will go back to NO, N2O, and N2O. So, and again, depending on what the pH of the soil happens to be, that will dictate which one of those gaseous nitrogens goes off. The other one that I talked about, but I haven't really given you an example yet, is volatilization. And the volatilization is very different from denitrification. Both are losses of nitrogen from a gaseous form. But from a denitrification standpoint, we're losing nitrogen gas, NO or N2O. From a volatilization standpoint, we're losing ammonia. So how does this work? If we take any ammoniated fertilizer and we add it to a soil that has either had agricultural limestone applied to it or is calcareous, what happens is the reaction between the ammoniated fertilizer and the calcium carbonate actually produces ammonium and CO2. Both of those go off as a gas. And so if we are surface applying our nitrogen source, we really have a tremendous potential to lose ammonium if we're applying it to these higher pH soils. And I'll give you an example of this in a slide, in a graph here in a minute. And then the other one is the immobilization. Now, immobilization is a temporary thing. It doesn't continue to occur, but it will occur until we get that nitrogen, carbon-nitrogen ratio down to that, at least that 30-to-1, or much better into the 20-to-1 and less. So we actually have net mineralization as compared to net immobilization. So it's a temporary loss of nitrogen. And the nitrogen is not gone. It's not actually lost. It gets tied up in the microorganisms, and then as those microorganisms die, whenever we get back down to that carbon to nitrogen ratio less than 20-to-1, then we actually start seeing it come back to us. So it's a temporary loss, but it's not a complete loss, whereas the denitrification and the volatilization are both complete losses. We lose that nitrogen back to the atmosphere. Next slide. So let's take a look and see what moisture, what each one of these particular things does to the loss of nitrogen. Denitrification occurs when we have some organic matter and we get into saturated conditions. So if you take a look at what we've got is we've got different moisture contents. We start out at 40, go to 75, 100, and then 400. 400% saturation is waterlogged conditions where you've actually got water standing on the surface. So how long does this actually take? Well, if we look at about 4 to 6 days, if we're under saturated conditions, we can really start to lose a lot of nitrogen after even 4 to 6 days. And when we get up to about 14 days, we could lose almost 100% of what we've applied from a denitrification standpoint. Now again, this is based on nitrate. This is the nitrate concentration. If we had ammonium there, then we don't have denitrification. So if you are growing plants in an aquatic situation, you want to use an ammoniated nitrogen source, not a nitrate source, because otherwise you're going to lose it. Next slide. So again, what happens whenever we're looking at denitrification? We start out in this particular graph, we've got nitrogen concentration on the left-hand side, and we look at what happens from a denitrification standpoint. So if we're looking at this and what just happens in a matter of hours, we start seeing the nitrate concentration start dropping after about 50 hours. And when we get to about 175 hours, we have basically gone from a nitrate concentration, and we're losing all that nitrate as a gas of into N2O or NO. So it doesn't take very long, and we can actually, and again, this is a complete loss. We can't get it back. It goes up into the atmosphere. Next slide. So this ammonium volatilization, this is a little bit different, but again, it is a loss of the nitrogen. You don't get it back. So again, we take ammoniated fertilizer and we add it to this calcium carbonate system. And again, it can be either a calcareous soil where the calcium carbonate's naturally high there to begin with, or we have added agricultural limestone to an acid soil. And this goes on the surface. And again, this is surface application. I'll show you what happens if we get it incorporated. So if we take something as an example, ammonium sulfate, add it to our soil that's got calcium carbonate in it, we produce gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, we produce anhydrous ammonia, and we produce CO2, both of which go back up into the atmosphere. So what this reaction is actually controlled by is the solubility of this salt. Whatever the reaction of this, or whatever the solubility of this salt happens to be, will push this equation either to the right or push it to an equilibrium. If we look at things like calcium sulfate, that is fairly insoluble, so this solubility is very insoluble, and so we actually drive this reaction to the right, and so we increase the amount of ammonia that's going to be lost in this reaction. So it's influenced by moisture conditions. If we have dry conditions, it doesn't work too well. But if we have good moisture, a fairly high temperature, and we have windy conditions, you can lose as much as 40 or 50% of your nitrogen within about 24 to 48 hours with this kind of a reaction if it's surface applied. So what do we need to do? We need to get it incorporated some way. We can either incorporate that ammonium fertilizer mechanically, or we can do it with irrigation. About 1/4 of an inch of water will actually incorporate it sufficiently that this reaction will not occur. So incorporation is the key to not having volatilization of ammonia from this particular kind of reaction. So next slide. This gives you an example of some different salts. So we look at ammonium sulfate, we've got diammonium phosphate, ammonium nitrate, and ammonium chloride. And again, this is the percentage of ammonium volatilized. So again, based on the solubility of this salt, the reaction product salt, the calcium sulfate, calcium phosphate, calcium nitrate, and calcium chloride. Calcium nitrate and calcium chloride are very soluble, so we have very little nitrogen actually lost. Only about 15% from a calcium nitrate or ammonium nitrate, and about 10% from ammonium chloride. You're still going to lose some, but you don't lose very much. But look at what happens whenever you use ammonium sulfate or diammonium phosphate. We can lose a whole bunch within about, again, 24 to 48 hours. So incorporation is the key to not losing this. If we've got it incorporated, we don't have this reaction occurring. Well, the reaction's still occurring, but the soil reacts with the ammonium, and it converts it to ammonium hydroxide, and then the ammonium hydroxide is then converted to nitrate, and we don't lose it. Next slide. Now, the other one that we have issues with from a volatilization standpoint is urea. Now, urea is not because of calcium carbonate. It's not a reaction with the carbonate. It's actually a reaction with an enzyme called urease. Urease is ubiquitous. What does that mean? It's everywhere. There is not any place on the Earth's surface that it has not been found. So urease is everywhere. And so it is the enzyme that breaks the bonds of the urea. So we react it with water, and we produce ammonium carbonate, which is very volatile. The ammonium carbonate then breaks down to CO2, water, and ammonia. And so it doesn't make any difference what the pH of the soil is. If we take urea and surface apply it, we are going to lose some nitrogen. However, pH does make a big difference in how much you're going to lose. So we need, if it's surface applied, if we have temperatures above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and we have high pH soils, we can lose a tremendous amount. So let me show you a figure with that. Next slide. So again, it does make a difference from a pH standpoint how much you're actually going to lose. So if we're between that pH of 6.5 and 7.5 that I told you where nitrogen is most efficient, if we surface apply urea, we can lose anywhere from 27 to 52% of the nitrogen can be lost if it's surface applied within about 24 to 48 hours. Now, if we're down here in the pHs of 5 and 5.5, where nitrogen's not very efficient, we don't lose much, but we also are not very efficient with our uptake as far as the plants are concerned. So if we're working in this 6.5 to 7.5 surface application of urea, we can lose a tremendous amount of nitrogen. So it very much behooves us to get it incorporated some way. So that's management. Next slide. So what are the potential losses if we actually look at it from a field standpoint? Urea, somewhere on the order of 35, and I've seen it happen go up as high as 50%. Ammonium sulfate, again in the field, I've seen it go up as high as 50%, even though it's listed as 25 here. If we get ammonium nitrate, probably 7 to 10% whenever you're out in the field. And again, this goes if we've got surface application, and the ammonium sulfate or the ammonium nitrate goes on calcareous soils. Next slide. So does this make a difference from a standpoint of what we get as far as a yield is concerned? In some cases it certainly can. So if we, this is some examples of corn and a grass pasture where we had the percent nitrogen loss as ammonia. With the corn, we didn't apply any. So we produced about 83 bushels. With urea, we put out the same amount of urea, UNA, which is urea ammonium nitrate. It's a liquid solution, and then ammonium nitrate. So this is the volatilization that or the amount of nitrogen that we lost with the exact same amount of nitrogen that was applied based on these three sources. And so you see that there's a little bit of difference between these two, the urea ammonium nitrate, and we get about 10 bushels more per acre with the ammonium nitrate because we didn't get near as much lost. Well, if we go to the pasture situation, urea versus ammonium nitrate, again we got about 0.2 tons per acre more. And again, you can see that when we put the nitrogen out, we do get a response from a plant standpoint as well. So nitrogen's important from getting a better yield goal, but if we're losing it from a volatilization standpoint, we can actually see decreases in yields. Money going up in the air is not a good thing. Next slide. So how do we incorporate? Well, we can do it with irrigation, or we can do it with incorporation. So if we look at it from an application on the surface, in this particular example, lost about 20% if we surface applied it. If we incorporated it to a quarter of an inch, we lost 15%, a half inch 12%, 1.5 inches only 6%. So we go from 20% to 6% if we could just get it incorporated by 1.5 inches. That doesn't take much power, and it doesn't take you can get across the field pretty quick if you're only scratching it about 1.5 inches deep. Well, what about irrigation or rainfall? If we can get it a quarter of an inch, that will be the same as an incorporation of 1.5 inches. So rainfall or irrigation makes a difference, or mechanical incorporation is key to reducing the potential for ammonia volatilization. So make for sure you know the difference between volatilization, goes off as ammonia, or denitrification, goes off as a nitrogen gas, as N2 N2O, or NO. So next slide. I also told you that these things can also cause, the phone's ringing, sorry, and Joe's not in here to answer it, so we'll just have to let it ring. Sorry. The material will most of the nitrogen ammoniated fertilizers will cause acidity in the soil, and this is a good example. This was done on a Lufkin soil at Overton, Texas, at the Experiments Research and Extension Center there at Overton. This was taken after 3 years of application of the same amount of nitrogen as ammonium nitrate or as ammonium sulfate. Where no nitrogen was applied, we have a pH of 6.2 after 3 years. Where ammonium nitrate was applied, 5.9, and where ammonium sulfate was applied, we've got 4.7. Well, what's the difference between ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate? Well, it's a difference between 4 hydrogens on ammonium nitrate and 8 hydrogens on ammonium sulfate. So on a fairly sandy soil, Lufkin's a fine sandy loam, we can drop the pH just a little bit, and going from no nitrogen applied to ammonium nitrate, we can drop it on a unit and a half by using ammonium sulfate. So can be very drastic change, and so you end up having to apply more agricultural limestone to raise the pH if we're using the more ammoniated sources of nutrients that we have as compared to the less ammoniated sources that we might have. Next slide. Management. You want to choose the inorganic form or the organic form that best matches your crop. If you're looking at the form of the nitrogen, the ammonium is the most reduced form and nitrate is the most oxidized form. So under aerated conditions, we can apply ammonium and it will be converted to nitrate, or the majority of it will be converted to nitrate through that mineralization process. Even though it didn't start out as an organic source, it still goes through the nitrification process. Well, if we're working with flooded situations like with rice, or from an aquatic standpoint from a horticulture standpoint, well, the best source of nitrogen for us to use is the most reduced form, or the ammonium form of nitrogen. Maintain optimum conditions for the mineralization if you're trying to use your organic forms, because if we apply an organic form of nitrogen and we don't have a good mineralization, then you don't get the nutrients that you need. So mineralization is very important if we're working with the organic forms of nitrogen, or any other source of nutrients for that matter. We want to optimize the nitrogen fertilizer efficiency. We want to add the fertilizer to the plants at the time whenever they need that nitrogen. That's the best way we can do it. Now, around our homes, we can usually do that. In an agricultural field, sometimes that doesn't work too well, just because we can't get into the field for one reason or another. It may be too dry, it may be too wet. Usually the conditions are too wet whenever we might have to be applying the nitrogen. So, when is the best time? Well, let me keep going. I've got a slide for that here in just a second. We want to manage to obtain or increase our organic matter. It's critical that we increase organic matter, or at least maintain it if at all possible. The primary reason for that is because we get nutrient cycling. It increases the aggregate stability of the soil particles, and whenever we've got better aggregate stability, we've got better structure in our soils. Better structure gives us better infiltration and percolation of our water. It gives us better water holding capacity for the plant. So organic matter is very, very important to our soil. So we want to try to maintain it or increase it if at all possible. Many of our soils in the state of Texas, because we've cropped them and not really paid attention to the organic as much as we should have, many of our soils started out in the 3 to 4% organic matter, and now they're somewhere between 0.2 and 0.5% organic matter in the surface. So we've really degraded the organic matter in a lot of our soils across the state of Texas. So we need to increase them if at all possible. Manage to obtain the carbon to nitrogen ratio of somewhere between 8 and 12 to 1. So if you're adding a residue, you want to add residues that have that are leguminous if you can. If you can't do that, then if you're using anything with the exception of a wood type material, you want to put out somewhere between 5 and 10 pounds of extra nitrogen per ton of material that you're putting out. If you're using wood products and you're actually incorporating them and you're using that as a source of nutrients, you probably are better off putting out somewhere around 20 pounds of nitrogen per ton of residue that you're applying. Next slide. So this is a good picture of a soil that's been waterlogged for quite some time. Some of that nitrogen has leached beyond the rooting ability of the corn at that stage of growth, and a lot of it's being denitrified. So because of the flooding conditions over a long period of time. And notice where the nitrogen deficiency symptoms are showing up. Because the nitrogen can be translocated in a plant, it's showing up in the older part of the leaves. Next slide. So what are some different sources of inorganic forms of nitrogen? We've talked about a few of these. Ammonium nitrate, which is 3300. Typically comes as dry prills, and it can be broadcast or side dressed, and then you want to incorporate it into the soil. Ammonium sulfate, also dry. 2100. Incidentally, where do those numbers come from? We don't just pull them out of the hat. It's based on the molecular weight of each of each of those different compounds. So if you look at ammonium nitrate, we've got 2 nitrogens in there, and everything else is going to be hydrogen and oxygen. If you take the 2 nitrogen molecular weights and divide that by the total molecular weight, then you have 33% nitrogen in that compound. Same thing with ammonium sulfate. You take the 2 nitrogens that are there, divide it by the total molecular weight of ammonium sulfate, and you have 21% nitrogen in that. Incidentally, ammonium sulfate is a great source of sulfur as well. For every pound of nitrogen, you get about a little bit over a pound of sulfur. So if you need sulfur, it's a great source of sulfur as well. Anhydrous ammonia, which is where we start in making all of our different nitrogen compounds, is 82% nitrogen. Typically, when you look at the cost of nutrient per compound, the anhydrous ammonia is the cheapest per pound of nitrogen. Now, of course, it will cost you more per ton because you got a lot more of it there, but it will typically be anywhere from 20 to 30% cheaper than any of the other sources of nitrogen per pound of nitrogen. And so usually ammonium sulfate is a little bit more expensive than ammonium nitrate per pound of nitrogen, but you have to apply less. So usually you come out in the long run if you use the more expensive ones per ton because they are cheaper per pound of nutrient. Aqua ammonia we don't use very much, but you can use it. It's a liquid and it's injected. Calcium nitrate is more used from a specialty standpoint. A lot of times you'll see it used in horticulture type situations. One thing that we've seen is that if you've got blossom end rot on tomatoes, calcium nitrate is a good source of nitrogen, and usually you don't have blossom end rot if you're using calcium nitrate as your source of nitrogen. Not exactly for sure. Maybe the horticulturalist can tell me why, but that's one thing that we've seen. Next slide. Some of the different other kinds that we've got the coated ones, the sulfur coated and the polymer coated. Again, we typically recommend that you not use these because they're a lot more expensive, and you usually don't get much response from them from a long-lasting standpoint. Same thing with the urea formaldehyde. These are they're good sources of nitrogen, but they're more expensive, and we don't get that long-lasting result that some of the cooler places do at night. And it seems to be where we have cooler nights across the United States that these slow-release nitrogen fertilizers work much better than what they do in the state of Texas, especially down in the south part of Texas. Next slide. Well, What about some of these organic sources of nutrients that we have? This is an example of manures. These analyses came from our soil testing laboratory. I asked the soil testing laboratory to give me all of the analysis that they had over a 10-year period, and this was done in 1999. So I should probably go back and look at these again, but that's when these were done. So 89 to 99 is when these analyses were actually done in the soil testing laboratory at Texas A&M. The reason I show you this is because it's got the manures have got all the nutrients in there. The kicker is that it's not necessarily the way a plant will actually use those nutrients, but they're all there. So when you're adding an organic source, you really don't need, many times you don't need to supplement with something else. Where we have gotten into issues is by applying many of these sources of nutrients which have very close to a 1-to-1-to-1 in P2O5 and K2O number. So how do you calculate that? Well, if you look at the nitrogen, it's a 1 times 1, so there's no conversion for nitrogen. To convert P to P2O5, you multiply by 2.29. So if you multiply that 0.54, 0.53 that we have in dairy and beef cattle by 2.29, you end up with about a 1.3, 1.4% P2O5. And with K2O, to convert K to K2O, you multiply by 1.2. So the 1.37 and 1.54, you end up with about a 1.5, 1.6% K2O. So we're looking pretty close to a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio of N to P2O5 to K2O. So if we put these out to meet our nitrogen needs, we're basically putting out the same amount of P2O5 and K2O that we would be looking at. But the way a plant uses those from those particular N, P2O5 and K2O is that somewhere between 3 and 4%, 3 times nitrogen, so 3 to 4% nitrogen, 1 P2O5, and 3 to 4 times K2O. So about a 3-1-3, 3-1 or 4-1-3, 4-1-4 type ratio that you would be using it. So we're putting out somewhere between 3 and 4 times more phosphorus every time we put out a sufficient quantity to meet the nitrogen needs from many of our organics. So this builds up the phosphorus in our soils, and we can contribute to some phosphorus problems that we have in our streams and lakes that we have, and we'll talk about that when we talk about phosphorus. So watch out for the adding of the organics, and I'll give you some more examples of the organics here in just a little bit. Now the poultry is a combination of chickens, layers, broilers, and turkeys. When we get a sample in that says poultry, we don't have any idea what it actually happens to be. So it's a combination of all of those. The swine, we had not had any samples sent in for swine, so this is a literature value, and it's basically what comes out of the animal fresh. The biosolids, that information is coming out of the city of Houston. The city of Houston has a tremendous number of municipal utility districts, some very large, some very small, and this is a combination of about 150 of them in working with a particular person that I know that works with the biosolids out of the city of Houston. So again, that kind of gives you an idea, and again, we've got calcium, magnesium. Sodium is not a nutrient for all plants, but it is for some, and for most plants it's detrimental to, so be cautious of applying things that have quite a bit of sodium in them because you can cause some issues from a soil standpoint. Next slide gives you some more of the micronutrients, and then also sulfur. So again, all of the nutrients are there. It's just not necessarily in the ratio that a plant would actually take them up. We don't need very much zinc and copper, especially in manganese. Most of our plants use quite a bit more iron than they do the zinc, copper, and manganese. And also they use a lot more sulfur than any of the others. So, but they're all there. So you don't usually need to supplement your organic sources with something else, even though that organic source may not tell you what's there. You've got all the nutrients there. Next slide. This comes out of the Master Gardener Handbook, and is an example of the different amounts of nutrients that are estimated and literature values that we found for many different types of organic sources of materials. So if you're looking for something that's high in nitrogen, blood meal is a great material. If you're looking for something that's fairly high in nitrogen and phosphorus, fish scrap, bat guano, bird guano is going to be very high in both of those. If you're looking for something that's fairly high in phosphorus but fairly low in nitrogen, you want to look at the bone meals, whether it be raw or steamed. Cottonseed meal's got a pretty good source of all three of them, as does cocoa shell, and then hoof and horn is a good source of nitrogen but doesn't have very much phosphorus or potassium in it. So just some examples. There's a lot more out there. Now, these are not fertilizers. These are not classified as fertilizers. These are soil amendments. So what's the difference between a fertilizer and a soil amendment? Well, a soil amendment does not have the three numbers. If it's got the three numbers or more on it, then it's going to be designated as a fertilizer. And so the fertilizers are regulated by Feed and Fertilizer, which happens to be located here on the Texas A&M campus. And so when you buy a bag of fertilizer, whether it be organic source or an inorganic source, those numbers are guaranteed analysis based on a particular type of extraction. When you buy a soil amendment, there are no guarantees. When you buy a bag of manure, you have no idea what that bag's got in it. Other than it's got manure, but you don't know what the nutrients concentrations happen to be. So just be aware that the soil, there's lots of places that sell different types of soil amendments. The sources that I've given you as examples here on the manures and the blood, the fish scrap, and things like that, those are pretty good sources, and we know that they work very well. But there's a lot of other sources out there as well that we don't have numbers for. And so the state of Texas does not have any kind of regulations or rules for soil amendments. Most of the states in the United States do. And so things that cannot be sold in other states are marketed here in the state of Texas. So the best thing I can tell you is that when you're looking at soil amendments that don't have any information from the standpoint of what's in that material, the best thing that you can do is just buyer beware. Again, we give you some examples of materials that we believe work very well, and we've got data to back it up. And so those are the materials that we suggest that you use. And so if you're using something else and you get a response, that's great, but we probably cannot help you explain why you're getting that kind of response. Many of those materials we know do not work, especially at the recommended rates that companies have for them. So like I said, the best thing I can say is just buyer beware. If you got some specific questions on a particular source, I can usually give you some information. There was a series of experiments done in the late 70s and early 80s, and it was published in the mid 80s by 13 different universities on a lot of these different sources of soil amendments. And so if you can give me the type of material that it happens to be, I can usually find it and give you some results based on the 13 southern southeastern states that worked on that. Texas was one of those states, and then most of the southeastern states worked on it as well. So, next slide. We kind of have rules of thumb of how much nutrient a particular crop and yield goal needs. Unfortunately, with many of the horticulture crops, we don't have this. So again, I suggest you go back to soil testing, and we always recommend that you soil test because you don't know how much nutrient's actually out in the field. And like I said, on some of these, especially on some of our agriculture fields, because we put out the nitrogen to meet the yield goal, we haven't met the yield goal. That nitrogen, unless we've had denitrification for some reason or a tremendous amount of leaching, is still there. And so we really need to cut back on the amount of nitrogen that's being applied to our soils. So for corn, about 1.1 pounds of nitrogen per bushel. Sorghum, about the same thing. Cotton, about 10 pounds per 100 pounds of lint. And then for the warm season grasses, about 50 pounds per ton. What are those symptoms? If you look at it from a grass standpoint, this is coastal Bermuda grass, and you can see that we've got much lower shorter vegetation where we don't have the nitrogen applied as compared to where the nitrogen is applied. So you got a yellow color, stunted growth, whereas where you have the nitrogen applied, you've got a very green color and much more healthy looking plant. Nitrogen on most of our grass crops is going to give this kind of symptom. If you look at the leaf, you get a V-shaped firing right in the middle, and the midrib starts to actually die off. In corn, we get very poorly formed ears, and in almost any kind of other small grain crop, we're going to get very greatly reduced tillering. Next slide. And again, nitrogen can be translocated, so we see the deficiency symptoms showing up in the bottom part of the plant first on the older leaves, and then the top part of the leaves still look okay. If you're at this point and you're running out of nitrogen, which is right at the time whenever you need the majority of your nitrogen for filling the ear of corn, you're going to see some reduced yields just because you ran out of nitrogen. Next slide. I'll show this slide several times as we go through the different elements that we're going to be talking about. So this first leaf, corn leaf, is what the healthy leaf is supposed to look like. And when we have the nitrogen deficiency, again, we get this middle part of the leaf. We get a firing, V-shaped firing, and that midrib goes ahead and dies very rapidly. Next slide. Now, too much of a nutrient is not necessarily good. I'm going to ask a question, but you don't have to respond from a response standpoint, but my guess is that many of us have grown tomato trees. And when you look at a tomato tree, it looks great. It won't set a bloom, but it grows and it grows and it grows. If it does try to set a bloom, it usually drops them. And the reason for that is that we've added way too much nitrogen. And according to that plant, he can grow vegetatively until it starts to run out of nitrogen or it starts to get stressed in some way. So the right amount of nutrient is what we need to be applying. And with cotton, I mean, many times over apply the nutrient of nitrogen to the cotton, and then we come back and we add picks to reduce the growth and make it go ahead and fill out from a plant standpoint for the cotton bolls. So we're wasting a lot of nutrients. So we need to start cutting back on and managing our nitrogen much better to grow the crop that we really want to grow. Next slide. It can also add to insect damage. What we've seen again with cotton is that if we have added too much nitrogen and we've got a lot of vegetative growth, that many times we get infestations with insects. This is just one example, the cotton aphid. Next slide. Environmental issues. We have two very important environmental issues with nitrogen. And most of this is with leaching or from a runoff standpoint. So one of those is with drinking water. We do have a primary drinking water standard of 10 milligrams of nitrate nitrogen per liter. Now, if you see this listed as nitrate only, the dash nitrogen won't be there, then that concentration would be 45 milligrams of nitrate per liter. So it all depends on whether you're reporting it on a nitrate basis or on a nitrogen basis, and most of the time you see it as a nitrogen basis. So 10 milligrams of nitrate nitrogen per liter. This contributes or has the potential to contribute to methemoglobinemia, which is blue baby syndrome. And so where we have this kind of issue, we always make for sure that pregnant women and infants less than 1 year old are given distilled water or bottled water. They're not drinking tap water. And there's a couple of aquifers that we have in the state of Texas that are naturally high in nitrate nitrogen. Most of those, it's believed that because that particular area had very leachable soils, very sandy soils, and we also had shallow groundwater tables. We had short and tall grass prairies, so the nitrogen was being recycled very easily. And so we think that nitrogen has actually come because of the vegetation and the potential and the ability of those soils to leach. The other one is high nitrate concentrations in surface water bodies, which contributes to eutrophication. Now, eutrophication is, the definition of it is actually the natural weathering process of a surface water body. But when we add high nitrate concentrations and we add, in our particular cases, high phosphorus concentrations, then we can actually speed up that process, and we end up with algal blooms, low dissolved oxygen concentrations, nasty stinky water, and eventually we end up with fish kills. It's kind of ironic. We've actually in most of our surface water bodies, we have a sufficient concentration of nitrate nitrogen to speed eutrophication up. The thing that's been the limiting factor has been low concentrations of phosphorus. But in many of our surface water bodies, we're getting that concentration up high enough that we're actually seeing the very nasty water and also some fish kills. So again, remember, nitrogen undergoes this oxidation and reduction. So it can be very reduced as ammonia. It can be very oxidized as nitrate, and so it goes. It's one of the elements in our soils. One of the few elements in our soils that can undergo oxidation and reduction depending on what's going on within the soil environment. Next slide. This looks like a grass, but it's not. It's a bayou that's a slow-moving stream, and again, we've got the eutrophication process that's going on here. Again, we've always had plenty of next slide. We've always had plenty of nitrate nitrogens in our water bodies to cause that kind of an issue. This is a deposition from the atmospheric deposition program. This shows the deposition of nitrate nitrogen in kilograms per hectare. This was for 1990. If you want to look at something more recently, you can go to just type in atmospheric deposition program, and you can look at all the isoplests that maps like this for nitrogen, pH, ammonia. There's several different ones that they have across there. Hasn't changed a whole lot since 1990, so that's a primary reason why I haven't updated this slide. But anyway, you can tell that up in the Northeast, we're getting about 18 kilograms per hectare. We get back to about half of Texas, and we're getting about 6 kilograms per hectare all the way back to the western part of the United States. So across Texas, somewhere between about 6 and 10, maybe up to about 13, 14, something like that, 12 or 14. So somewhere between about 5 and 13 pounds of nitrate nitrogen actually falls on us on a yearly basis. Next slide. So does it make any difference what source? This is a good slide to show you that no, it doesn't. So if we take a look at any of the different nitrogen sources, we put out the same rate in pounds per acre, we don't get any statistical differences between the yields that we've got there. Even though it's roughly 1 ton per acre, there was enough variability here that we did not get any statistical differenses between the anhydrous ammonium and the urea ammonium nitrate that we applied. Next slide. What about foliar versus soil application? This we do see a difference. And again, the plant is designed to take nutrients up through its roots. So if we take a look at this one, and in regards to cotton, the control had produced 481 pounds of cotton lint. We side dressed it with 29 pounds of nitrogen, or we side dressed it with 27 pounds of nitrogen and 9 pounds of P2O5. We got 588. We added the same amount of nitrogen with 3 foliar applications, and we got we got the same or similar characteristic as with no nitrogen applied, whereas we got roughly 83 pounds more lint when we put it on a side dress in the soil. So net return in dollars was $30. Net return where you added a side dress, where you put it down, and from a foliar standpoint, you lost your money. Next slide. So when does a plant really need nitrogen? Well, I'm going to show you several of these graphs with different elements, but they all look pretty close to the same. Somewhere between 20 and 25 days is when most plants really start to need their sources of nutrients. So if we could, and again, around our homes, we can do this, but whenever we're out working in the field, you're really taking a chance to actually get your sources of nutrients out there at about 15 to 20 days. But from a home garden standpoint or something like that, we can do this because we can walk out there in the mud and put our sources of nutrients down. From an inorganic standpoint, if you're using organics, you got to put this out at least a month ahead of time. So 2 weeks before you plant should be sufficient to have enough nutrients for your plant if you're putting out organic sources. So again, somewhere between this 20 and 25 days is when the nutrients are really needed, and they really take off from a standpoint of being taken up by the plant. So that's when the plant really has to have those nutrients. If they're not there, then we get deficiencies. Next slide. So management considerations with the ammonia volatilization, incorporation. Very, very critical. Residual acidity, we're going to have to add some limestone every once in a while, especially if you don't have any carbonates in your soils to neutralize the acidity of the nitrogen sources. And all fertilizers will cause acidity. It doesn't make any difference what your nutrient source happens to be, you're going to cause some acidity. The timing of the fertilizer, around our homes, if we can put it out roughly 15-20 days after we put it in the ground, then that's whenever the plant's going to need it the most, and that's when we get the most efficiency. If you're working at it from an agriculture standpoint, you probably need to be putting it out pre-plant or right at planting if you can. The method of fertilizer application, you need it incorporated to the very best of your ability. That's key. So get it out there when you can, and then get it incorporated so that you don't lose it from a runoff or from an volatilization standpoint or from a erosion standpoint. Next slide. So methods of application, broadcast, incorporation. This is mainly for agriculture, and I'm not sure how many of y'all are working at it from an agriculture standpoint, but if you're putting it putting a source of nutrients like a pop-up fertilizer in with the seed, this is critical. Make for sure you never put more than 10 pounds per acre of a combination of nitrogen and potassium. If you do, you're probably going to salt out your seed. So be very careful in putting fertilizer and seed out together. If you're banding it or injecting it into the soil, we found that you can put approximately half, or if you want to be a little conservative, 3/4 of the amount of nutrient recommended if you're banding it or injecting it. And banding and injecting means that you're going to be putting this below the seed or to the side of the seed, somewhere on the order of about 2 to 3 inches, so it's actually away from the seed. Next slide. Pre-plant, again, this works up real good for perennial crops. So right at the time whenever you're starting to get right at green up or right before green up, then you want to get that in there. Again, the pop-up fertilizers, watch out for that salt problem that you have with nitrogen and the combination of nitrogen and potassium. Next slide. Side dress works very well. Fall application, if you've got some real heavy soils from a clay standpoint, it works better on there. Those, if you've got a real sandy soil, you really stand a potential for getting a lot of leaching. Next slide. So base the rates on a realistic crop yield goal, and we want you to base it on soil testing. Makes a big difference. And next slide. Split your applications to the very best of your ability, because like with our lawns, what we recommend is that you apply like 1 pound, depending on what the grass happens to be, roughly 1 pound per 1,000 square feet of nitrogen, and depending on the grass, you'll put out anywhere from 2 to 4 pounds to get your optimum aesthetics as far as the grass is concerned. With most of our flower beds and things like that, 1 to 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet of nitrogen is sufficient to carry it through the whole year. Same thing with most of our gardens. You may have to, depending on what you're trying to grow in the garden, if you're growing corn, tomatoes, probably the 3 to 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet across the growing season, roughly every 4 weeks. Does a pretty decent job. If you're trying to grow something like beans and peas, you probably don't even need the nitrogen, because they're supposed to be fixing the nitrogen themselves.